social worker, it is important that I identify my personal values and that I have awareness of the impact that it will have on my practice. Through self-reflection, I believe that I have identified 5 core personal values of mine and recognize the positive impact that it will have on my future social work practice. Firstly, equality. I believe equality is an important personal value that I'll bring to my social work practice. It will allow me to be aware of the dynamic of power in a social worker-client relationship, and when I can address this power imbalance. It means that I will be treating my clients as equals and try to empower them to make their own decision, rather than telling them what I believe is best for them. My personal value of equality will also drive me to advocate for my client, so that I can work towards them having the equal rights and opportunities as everybody else. Next personal value of mine is justice. Justice is another important personal value that I'll bring to my social work practice. It means that I'll be guided by a moral righteousness of what I believe is right and wrong, rather than blindly following procedures. I believe as a social worker this value is important, especially when I self-reflect on social work history, including the stolen generation, the forgotten Australians, the British child migrants, and the forced adoptions. I believe it is important that as a social worker I question the authority, and that I question my duty as a social worker, that I am driven by a moral compass, and that I continuously self-reflect on my role and what I have done in my position of power. My next value is respect. Respect is a personal value that I'm very passionate about. I believe that getting respect is vital for a person's self-worth, value, and identity, that it plays a vital role in shaping a person's confidence and allows a person to live up to their full potential. I believe that in a social work practice it is important that I give my patients respect. I also believe that it is important that I practice in a way that my clients give me respect. However, I'm aware that it is important that I do not let this desire to be respected come above acting appropriately, morally, and professionally. The next value I'll be talking about is empathy. My personal value of empathy will allow me to be compassionate and understanding towards my clients. It will allow me to be aware and relate to my clients' feelings, thoughts, and experiences. This insight will give me a deep understanding of their situation and make me better equipped to work with clients, and will allow me to understand how to empower them to make their own decisions. Having empathy to my client's situation will also allow me to relate to my clients and build a more positive relationship with them. The last personal value is open-minded. Open-minded is a personal value that is important in social work practice. It will mean that I'm open to new ideas and allow me to understand the perspective of my clients. It will lead me to listen, value, and consider my clients' worldviews. It will give me the advantage of not being stuck in my worldview and provide me with the flexibility of understanding other views and developing a more holistic and evolved understanding of the world. By being open-minded, I can create a peaceful and understanding relationship with my client. I'm also able to set a good example to my client of listening and acknowledging and understanding other perspectives. I see my clients as human beings that are flawed, imperfect, beautiful, and valuable. My clients are individuals. They are from all different backgrounds and cultures. This means they all have different beliefs, customs, and values. These different experiences mean that all my clients have different worldviews and perspectives. This makes it important that as a social worker I'm listening to them, understanding them, not just assuming that my clients have the same priorities and perspectives as me. This means asking them why they are doing what they are doing, why they are feeling what they are feeling, what is important to them, what changes they want, and most importantly, how can I help them? I see my clients as unique individuals with inherent worth. I believe that as a social worker, it is my job to listen to my clients, appreciate and value their lived experiences, to empower them to make their own decisions and live their life the way they want to. I see my clients as unique, valuable human beings. Through my learning experience with this subject, I now understand that to work with my clients respectfully, I need to have an intercultural social work practice that works with clients in a decolonised and post-colonial way. Integrating decolonisation into my social work practice means empowering clients that want to restore their cultural practices, thinking, beliefs, and values that they have previously had stripped away. An important part of this is to, of course, ask the client what is important to them and what cultural practices and belief they want to restore into their lives. Decolonized social work practice means having a self-awareness of my role as a social worker and accountability for what I do in my role. This relates back to my earlier discussed value of justice and being guided by a moral compass rather than blindly following orders. As a social worker, I have a responsibility to reflect on my parts of social work that have been colonized by whiteness, including neoconservatism that uses government power to pursue conservative policies, bureaucracy that focuses on the importance of procedural correctness rather than human needs, and managerialism that utilizes control and accountability to oppose individuals and groups. It is also important that as a social worker, I apply post-colonial to my social work practice. This means as a social worker, I need to challenge the socially accepted idea that West knows best. I should be rethinking our history and our current white structured society. I need to respect and value my clients' cultural practices, thinking, beliefs, and values. I need to advocate for my clients to have their own cultural practices and values integrated into our society, and advocate for the community to celebrate differences and individuals and learn to embrace it into our society.
Me and all my friends, we're all misunderstood. They say we stand for nothing and there's no way we ever could. Now we see everything that's going.
When developing my intercultural social work framework, it is important that I consider the social, historical, cultural, and political issues that are relevant. This will allow me to learn from the mistakes of previously failed approaches that worked with the community, as well as acknowledging approaches that were successful. Then, by considering the current issues, I'll be more informed about issues that I need to address and be able to explore possible approaches that would be effective. One of the major social constructs to consider is racism in Australia. In Australia, we have strong historical roots of racism with regards to our treatment of Aboriginal people, such as Aboriginal land rights, with Aboriginals being unable to claim their traditional land of it being designed for other purpose, the history of the stolen generation that stole Aboriginal children from their families with the belief that this is in the best interest of the child. Currently, there is a social issue of Australia Day being celebrated on Australia's Day of Mourning, with Aboriginal community demanding for Australia Day to be changed to a different date. This demonstrates how significant Aboriginal culture and voice is ignored in Australia's predominantly white society. Politically, Australia's government intervention with the Aboriginal community has been mostly negative, with the intervention dismissing Aboriginal culture and voice, utilising a controlling approach that patronises their community. One notable example of this is the 2007 Howard intervention. That was a massive intervention in the Northern Territory aimed to protect Aboriginal children from sexual abuse. This intervention was used without consultation of Aboriginal people, heavily regulating Aboriginal people, leaving the community to feel ashamed and angry. One example of a positive political intervention is the 2008 Kevin Rudd apology speech that acknowledged that Aboriginal communities' suffering and took accountability for the government's involvement. This apology had a positive impact on the Aboriginal community, and it took a giant step towards reconciling Australia. This was because it actually listened to what the Aboriginal community wanted. Another aspect of racism to address is the racism against refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers. Historically, Australia has been very racist against non-white immigration, with a white Australian policy that has banned non-white immigration up until 1901. Even today, Australians, politicians, and mass media produce negative perceptions of refugees and immigrations, with politicians defending the social structure in Australia that disadvantages and discriminates against refugees and asylum seekers. The most well-known case is previous Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who used the slogan "Stop the Boats" in his political campaign to gain power. The media creates hysteria in the Australian community by enforcing racial stereotypes, such as Aboriginals being dog bludgers and Muslims being terrorists. This all contributes to the strong presence of racism in Australia. It is also important that I am aware of the impact of globalization on my intercultural social work practice. Globalization will bring global issues such as war, famine, and poverty to my local context. For example, when I am working with clients who are refugees and immigrants and suffering from trauma experienced in war. There is also the television and internet that broadcast global issues right into my home. This makes it my role as a social worker to be aware of global issues and have a greater empathy to understand the suffering of people from different cultures. Furthermore, as a social worker, I have a duty to advocate for global issues and work for larger global change in my practice. In my own lived experience, it is important that I acknowledge my culture and how I have grown up. In my own lived experience, my family has lived in Australia as far back as I can trace it, and my family has no other cultural identity other than whiteness. I grew up on the Central Coast in New South Wales in a dominantly white suburb, and other than travel, I've had no real exposure to other cultures. This makes it important for me to draw on my ideas of open-mindedness when working, and to learn about other cultures whenever I have the opportunity to. There is also the social issue of gender inequality. This relates to one of my main personal values of equality. This means addressing the cultural and political issues of both women's and men's rights. With Australia having a sexist historical past, women not having the right to vote until 1902, women historically and presently have not been had reproductive rights. For example, the past of forced adoption, where babies were removed from their unmarried mothers against their will, placed up for adoption, with the belief that this was in the best interest of the child. Currently, for reproductive rights, abortion is still legal in New South Wales and Queensland. There is also the social barrier of gender inequality in the workforce, with men on average being paid more than women, and women being unrepresented in the government. There is also the men's rights, with men having more social stigma about expressing emotion. This means that men have more shame when reporting things such as sexual assault, and men being less likely to seek help for mental health illnesses. This results in men having higher rates of suicide, with 75% of suicides in Australia being by men. I see the power I have in my position as a social worker as a responsibility that I must use ethically. I believe that it is important that I have a strong awareness of how I use my power and continuously self-reflect on how I use it and how it impacts on my client. To ensure that I use my power responsibility in intercultural social work practice, I will utilize a strength-based framework that focuses on the strengths of different cultures and works towards understanding the different values and beliefs. Through general dialogue, I'll be able to empower people from different cultures with a voice and enable them to actively participate in decision making. When you put this in the context of working with the Aboriginal community, this approach will allow me to address the power imbalance between social worker and clients, as well as the power imbalance between being white and Aboriginal. This will ensure that the Aboriginal community doesn't feel suppressed or exploited. Through my personal values of empathy, I'll be able to understand the lived experience of Aboriginal people and have insight into how to effectively approach the complex situation of racism in Australia. I will also draw on my personal value of open-mindedness when learning about their values and culture. This will allow me to build a positive relationship with the Aboriginal community, and through this positive relationship, both myself and my clients will be able to act outside our individual limitations and collaborate together to create new ideas and develop new solutions that suit this specific situation. This will also provide a holistic response and provide the Aboriginal community with self-determination and social inclusion, as the Aboriginal community is often disempowered and not heard or valued in Australian Western society. It is also important that I use the power that I have as a social worker to advocate on behalf of the Aboriginal community, to the government and the community, to get more respect and control of their life, and dispute the white privilege belief that West knows best. Before this course, I had heard about white privilege, but I hadn't truly understood the concept. Through my learning experience of this course, I now have a deeper understanding of what white privilege is and how it has impacted directly upon my life. I now truly comprehend the idea of privilege and can self-reflect on what advantages and opportunities I have received because of my ethnicity. I can identify how being white has made it easier for me to find employment and allowed me to build positive relationships with people within my community. I now also have a better understanding of how people from other cultures and races are discriminated against in Australia. Although I understand that without experiencing it, I can never truly understand the experience myself. To address this inequality caused by the privilege of being white, I will apply an anti-oppressive approach to my social work practice, building a relationship with my clients that will empower them and reduce the negative effects of social discrimination, allowing us to work together to create a positive change. Within the context of working with refugees, this approach will allow me to focus on addressing the social division and structural inequalities caused by racism in Australia. With macro systematic change, I can work to change how Australia is structured through reducing the structural inequalities upon which people from different races experience. For example, drawing on my personal value of justice, I can advocate for Australia to take more refugees and working with the Aboriginal community, Australian community to teach them to understand and embrace different cultures. I can also draw on my personal values of equality when working with the community and teaching them to be respectful of other people's cultures. An example I will draw on for this is the excursion we had for this subject, and how listening to refugee stories I personally felt viewed and now understand the complexity of their situations. As a direct result of this, I'm now more passionate about this issue. I believe as a social worker I could draw an approach like this with an anti-oppressive framework when working with the community and teaching them to embrace people from different cultures and have more empathy to the lived experience of refugees and immigrants, with the understanding that the best way to understand the lived experience of people is to, of course, ask them and listen to them. My intercultural social work practice will encounter ethical challenges where my values and social work practice won't connect with each other or connect with my client's values. I need to be aware of the limitations of my developing intercultural social work framework and consider how to handle these ethical dilemmas in a way that is both professional and ethical. I can achieve this by being aware of my personal bias and having self-awareness of how my beliefs and preferred ideas about social work practice will impact on my social work practice and work. I need to take into account my preferred approaches of social work and make sure that I am still upholding the ASW Code's social work values. I will approach these ethical challenges with transparency, being honest about my bias to whoever it is appropriate to inform, depending on the situation, for example, the organisation or the client. By doing this, I'm making sure that whoever needs to know is aware, and that I will be held accountable for this bias impacting on my word. When making an ethical decision, I need to be making a conscious decision about which personal values and social work values are more important. In some situations, this might involve ignoring my personal views or emotion. However, it is important that I do balance this with staying true to my values, as my personal values are important to me and to my social work. Throughout my social work practice, I should be self-reflecting on the ethical decisions I have made to determine how effectively I handle the situation and identify any ways I can improve on addressing ethical challenges in the future. The first ethical challenge to consider is when I will be faced with a situation where my values and my clients' values don't connect, and I am confronted by a situation of working with clients who have different core values to me. An example of this would be if I had to work with clients who had a racist or sexist view that is embedded into their cultural beliefs. I would find this personally confronting, as these are two issues I'm very passionate about, and I would struggle to keep my opinions to myself. I would approach this ethical dilemma by using my personal values of open-mindedness and listening to my clients' values and respecting their right to have values that are different to mine. I would also listen to see if we could find any commonalities that we agree on. Using a strength-based framework to focus on the strengths of their culture and work towards understanding why they have values that are different to mine. I would also be transparent and honest about these differences in my views, while still assuring that I do this in a way that does not attack my client's views. This will allow me to practice in a way that values my client's individual beliefs and right to autonomy, while still allowing me to stay true to my own personal beliefs of equality. I do this with understanding that my job as a social worker is to provide clients with autonomy and respect, and this is more important than my desire to express my opinions. The second ethical challenge would be if two of my social work practice values contradicted with each other, and I am confronted by a situation where I have to decide which one to prioritize. To show an example of this, I will draw on the case study from the class of the newly arrived immigrant that burned a chair after his soccer game that concerned the neighbour and resulted in them calling the police. The ethical challenge of this situation would be working with the client in an anti-oppressive and decolonized way, wanting him to express the emotions the way he did in his culture, and the need to prepare him to be living within the rigid constructs of white Australia. To approach this situation, I will use my personal values of empathy to understand his experience and acknowledge how confusing it would be to move to a country with different cultures and to not be able to understand them. I would empower my client with knowledge about white culture, to show that he understands why the neighbour and police acted the way they did, while still assuring that he feels comfortable to express his emotion however he chooses to. This will treat him with respect and allow him to make a decision of how he will balance his culture within the context of white structured Australia.